Hi guys, Matt here from Some Fish Aquariums. Today with episode 4 of my series, Plants and Tank, Beginner to Pro, Fast. In episode 4, we're going to talk about RO water or tap water. And we're going to tell you just what you need to know to go from beginner to pro. Alright, so there's basically only two reasons that people consider RO water, or that we're going to discuss today. So the first is that pH controls whether or not the nutrients are available to the plants. The second is that the TDS, the total dissolved solids, all the different mineral content of the water, is much more easy to control if you're starting with RO water because it doesn't have any total dissolved solids. Let's talk just a little bit more about that first one, the pH, and how the nutrients get locked up if the pH is too high. So like if you're above 8.0, I myself, my tap water is above 8.0 pH. So when you have a pH that high, a lot of the nutrients are locked in a state where the plants can't use them. Nutrients are locked up so the plant can't get them, even though they might be in the water. They're just not made available to the plant. So if we use RO water, we'll talk more about that later, but it just makes the nutrients more available to the plants. So a lower pH might be more advisable. So that's one reason people use RO water. The second reason is that total dissolved solids. It's all the mineral content in the water. So all of our liquid fertilizer that we put in the tank, that adds to the total dissolved solids. So also the tap water that we have usually has dissolved solids in the forms of calcium and magnesium. That makes up the majority of the total dissolved solids that are in your water. If you've seen my channel before, you know that I don't like using water softeners with those salt crystals. So that will also dictate how much total dissolved solids is in your water, except those total dissolved solids will a lot of times be a lot of sodium content, and I hate that. Plants hate sodium because it's poison to plants. Alright, so definitely don't use your water softener. If you're using your RO unit, that might be a little different. Alright, so using an RO unit allows us to control how much total dissolved solids are in the water. We know that any excess nutrient can create imbalance in the aquarium. If there's any nutrient that's in more supply than the plants can use, usually algae is going to find a way to use that instead. We don't want that. So that's one of the main reasons we want to control this total dissolved solids, because that's a lot of times telling us what kind of nutrients are in the water. Or not what kind, but how much nutrients are in the water. And if they're too high, there's a good chance that we have an imbalance, and the algae is going to take advantage of that imbalance. So using the RO unit gives us the ability to control these factors. So let's go to our chart now and see how the pH and TDS impacts what plant choices and plant selection we have for our tanks. So in the upper left-hand corner, we see that this is basically hard water, where you have high pH. Like I do, my tap water is 8.0 or above sometimes, and we have a high TDS. Usually my tap water comes out around 400 parts per million. So it's a hard water, a lot of calcium, and a high pH. So that's my tap water. You can grow a lot of plants in this condition, but you're kind of limited to plants that prefer hard water. So that's going to be like anubias, hornwort, Vallisneria loves these conditions. Water wisteria will do well. Java fern, Java moss. Those are all good choices. And crypts, a lot of people love their crypts. Those are all plants that can handle these kind of hard water conditions. So you don't really, if that's all you're after, you don't need to worry about this pH and TDS all that much. Your plant selection may be a little bit limited to plants that like the hard water, because it does limit the amount of nutrients that are available to the plants. So only these plants that have adjusted to those circumstances will do well. So then as we move to these other quadrants of our chart, you'll see that the top right and the lower left are kind of just mixed, going towards softer, that bottom right corner. So a lot of these hard water plants will do just fine in soft water conditions. Now there are extremes, right? If you go too soft, things like Vallisneria are going to melt. Most of these hard water plants can handle moving through these quadrants pretty well. But if you get too soft, that's where you start losing some of these plants that can do well in hard water. They'll start dropping off if you get too soft. But almost all hard water plants can handle going into the soft water. The reverse is not true. Most soft water preferring plants cannot go into hard water without suffering. The reason for that is mostly because those nutrients aren't available when the water is hard with a high pH. Those nutrients are locked up in the water column and the plants can't get them. All right, so once you get into that lower soft water, you got your areocolons. The areos are popular soft water plants, as well as Tonina fluvitalis, Rotala macrandra. These are plants that do well in soft water that might be on your list. All right, so if you're not trying to keep any plants that really prefer soft water, you'll be just fine going somewhere in the middle. All right, so the beginner to pro recommendation here is to go with something around 7.0 pH. 6.5 to 7.5, you'll probably be just fine. All right, because remember, that pH, the substrate, will bring it down some. And if you're using CO2, which will be in a future video, that CO2 is going to bring your pH down. So if you start with a 7.5 pH, you're probably okay because those things are going to bring it down. But a 6.5 to 7.5 pH would be just fine. It's really nothing to worry about. If you get above 7.5 and you want to keep these soft water plants, you pretty much are going to want to use RO water. All right, so that's the beginner to pro recommendation for pH, is below 7.5. All right, what about TDS? What's the beginner to pro recommendation here? So your total dissolved solids for your pro tank is going to be between 120 and 150 parts per million at the start of the week, right after your water change. Let's try to hit like 120 parts per million. It's not, you don't have to be too precise with that because your nutrients are constantly fluctuating, right? So the plants are taking up nutrients, so they'll be going down some, but you're adding those fertilizers in every day, right? You're adding a couple drops or a couple milliliters of your liquid fertilizer every day. So those are going to raise those total dissolved solids, because that's what the total dissolved solids is those minerals that you're adding in through those fertilizers. So your total dissolved solids will go up throughout the week. Sometimes you could start at 120, and if you're dosing really heavy and you have a large plant mass, you might end up with 200 parts per million at the end of the week. And you might, if you're measuring it every day, you might not understand what's going on. But that's what's going on. You're adding those fertilizer in. So as you do your water changes, that brings it back down, and we'll start back at about 120 parts per million at the beginning of the week, and they'll go up as you do your fertilizing. All right, recap just a little bit. So you got your pH below 7.5 with the RO water if you don't have tap water like that. And then you've got your total dissolved solids between 120 to 150. If it gets a little too high, that's just extra nutrients in the water. You might get algae and stuff, but like it's not anything that I would worry about if it's fertilizer and you're kind of on top of it. It's not going crazy high. But doing that water change will keep them under control. So for my tanks in my tap water situation, I have to use RO if I want to use soft water. My tap comes out like 8.5 pH. And total dissolved solids, I think I'm around 400 parts per million in my tap water. So I have to use an RO unit. But what I want to do, because I want to get around 120 parts per million, I have to use RO water, but I use 2/3 RO water to 1/3 tap water. This allows me to have some calcium and magnesium from my tap water, and it keeps the TDS up at around 120 to 150 if I do that mixture around 2/3 RO water to 1/3 tap water. You will probably have to do a little different mix because everyone's tap water is a little bit different. If you're starting out with tap water that's got 120 parts per million and your pH is around 7.0, you really don't have any good reason to use RO water unless your total dissolved solids are heavy, like too much magnesium versus calcium. But I wouldn't worry about that. That's probably not that big of a deal. And if you have like 120 parts per million in your tap of total dissolved solids and your pH is 7.0, there's really no need to consider RO, in my opinion. Or if you have soft water, like your pH is like 6.5, and your total dissolved solids are not up that high. You can get them higher, like if you need to raise it a little bit. There's Equilibrium and there's GH Booster, things like that you can buy that will bring it up a little bit if you want to bring it up. Most people don't have that problem, and I don't think that would even be anything. Even soft water people probably aren't doing that. I don't know nearly as much about the soft water, tap water supplies because I don't have it. So how do you know what your pH is or your TDS, right? How do you do that? Do you use the test kits with those little drops in the tubes? Um, I don't. I mean, I have them, I use them, but they're very slow. So I recommend something much, much more efficient. You can get these pens. So I've got a pH pen and a TDS pen, right? So these you can get very cheap on Amazon. I will put the links below like normal. And this one is made by VivoSun, but let me show you here. There you go. And this one, they're very affordable, and they allow you to measure the pH. So if I turn it on here, you get a reading right there. And when you put it in the water, it's got a max level. You put it in, and it'll read your pH. And you probably can't see the number, but it takes a minute here. Okay, so with the magic of editing here, that took about a minute. It's still kind of bouncing around a little bit, but it's reading right now at about 7.27, and it's dropping ever so slightly, slowly. But so it's probably around 7.2 by the time it finishes out here. So that's it's about 6 a.m. when I'm recording right here, and that's when the CO2 turns on. The CO2 will turn on around noon because my lights come on at about 1. So the CO2 will turn on earlier. We'll do a full video on CO2 soon, but what you'll see is that the pH will drop when the CO2 turns on. Sometimes it'll go all the way down to 6.5 by the end of the day. So this allows you to check the pH pretty quickly. All right, and the same thing for the TDS, right? You got a meter here, you just turn it on, and for this one, you have to hit it a couple times to get, I use Fahrenheit for temperature. It's got temperature on there, and I'm just gonna dip it in here, and it'll tell you how many parts per million of total dissolved solids I've got in here. So today is Friday that I'm recording, and my water change day is on Sundays, and my parts per million is 147. I don't know if it's going to show up on camera, but it's 147 parts per million. The temperature takes a while to read, so don't get too hung up on that. That's not my actual temperature. I keep these tanks around 73 degrees. But what you'll see here, yeah, so I've got 147 parts per million, and my water change day is coming up. So that's right where I want it. And that's a super efficient way to measure the total dissolved solids. You can see how much your tap water is. You just dip that in a cup of tap water, or you can see if your RO unit is working. You just dip it into a bucket of RO water, and you'll make sure that your RO unit's working properly, because sometimes when they get older, they stop removing solids, so you'll have a bucket of RO water that's basically the same as your tap water. That's no good. So I highly recommend those. Also, let's talk about RO units, right? So they used to be, I think they were crazy expensive. But right now there's companies like RO Buddy on Amazon. That's where I find it. They've got a lot of affordable options. They hook up very easily. If you have like a laundry room in your house where there's like an extra laundry sink, that's where I installed mine. It's in my utility room. There's like a laundry sink, and you just hook it up to that. Hopefully I'll get some B-roll together and put like a video up here of how I do my RO water. The RO Buddy is, I'll put the links below in the description. It makes good RO water, and there's other companies on there too, Geek Pure. I think they're a very similar product, and you get the RO water that you need. They do take a long time to get you the RO water. My unit that I got is 75 gallons per day, and that takes quite a while to get me the RO water that I use. So I actually use a storage tank, and I just fill up that storage tank, and I keep a bubbler in there, and I let the RO I fill it up with RO and I let the bubbler run, and then I always have RO water ready to go when I need it. All right, so let's talk about our second topic, is how to keep this stable over time, right? We talked about how the total dissolved solids kind of changes throughout the week. We know that the changing water parameters, like if nitrogen swings more than 10 parts per million throughout the week, that can cause plant adaptation, which is them having to form new leaves that can handle those new conditions. So you don't want to force the plant into that adaptation mode because it's going to stress it out. And if you have old leaves that uh, the old leaves will start to decay and they'll attract algae. So you don't want to force your plant into plant adaptation at all. They do kind of the same thing with CO2 levels. So you want to try to set your CO2. Um, Obviously, we only run the CO2 when the lights are on. We'll talk about that in a future video. But you start your CO2 before the lights come on, about an hour, and then to turn it off about an hour before the lights turn off, right? So that the CO2 is in the water column just when the lights are on, basically. If you reduce how much CO2 you're putting in the water, that can force the plants into adaptation. So you don't want to swing back and forth between using CO2 and not using CO2. Or all right, so to keep your water stable, use your mixture of RO water that works good for you. And for me, that's the 2/3 RO water to 1/3 tap water. And when you do a water change, you're gonna remove, I do 25% water change every week because that's a very manageable for my maintenance schedule. If you do more than that, it just gets to be just too much work for me, for most people. So if you just do 25%, you're gonna get the desired results that you're after, where you're taking good care of your tank. It's good maintenance, it's weekly, but it's not so much work that it's puts you off to where you start missing days if you get busy in life, right? So you're going to do your 25% water change and trying to adjust your parameters back to that baseline where you had that 120 to 150 parts per million of TDS. So to recap, we've talked about pH and how if it's too high, it locks up the nutrients for the plants. And we've talked about total dissolved solids and how that can be hard on softwater plants. If there's too many total dissolved solids, the TDS is too high. So and then we talked about how the plant selection matters. If you want those hard water plants, that's just fine. But if you're trying to get soft water plants and your tap water is hard, you're going to want to adjust with RO water. We found our baseline for a pro planted tank of 120 to 150 parts per million of total dissolved solids and a pH below 7.5. And we talked about our maintenance plan where we're doing 25% water changes and we're making sure that the CO2 is stable and the nitrogen is stable because of those water changes. And we've talked about how to measure these things with our Vivo Sun pens. And we talked about the RO units that work for me. So that's all you need to know about RO water to go from beginner to pro fast. Make sure you like and subscribe if you think this information is useful or helpful for your friends, because that's how more people will see it. YouTube will send it to them. It only sends it to a few people. If you don't hit the like button, or if you don't subscribe, you won't see the next video. And if you don't watch the playlist, you won't see the good lighting, good substrate, all the different tips that we've already covered in the other guides. If I missed anything or you want to say you liked the video, comment below. I read every comment and I will respond back. All right, thanks for watching. If you want to see beginner to pro on lighting or substrates or fertilizers, those videos are already complete. That's episodes 1 through 3. And this was episode 4. And hit subscribe and the notification bell if you want to see the next video. All right, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.